Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second in a series that NASA is doing for a spring webinar series. This particular series is Media Literacy Education with Clint Watts and Michelle Chula-Lipkin. We are delighted to have them both. They bring something very special to this conversation, both experts in their field. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Leslie Reynolds. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Secretaries of State. We are pleased to be able to offer this webinar series with the support of the Democracy Fund. So thank you to the Democracy Fund. If you have any questions as we go through these presentations, please type them in the chat and I'll moderate the questions after the presentations get going. First up, we are going to have a NAS favorite, actually. He's quite sought after from our members. If you don't follow Clint Watts on Twitter, I suggest that you do. He can be found at Selected Wisdom, which he is. Clint Watts is a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a non-resident fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. He is also a national security contributor for NBC News and MSNBC. He recently examined the rise of social media influence by publishing his first book entitled Messing with the Enemy: Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. His research and writing focuses on terrorism, counterterrorism, social media influence, and Russian disinformation. Clint's tracking of terrorist foreign fighters allowed him to predict the rise of the Islamic State over al-Qaeda in 2014. From 2014 to 2016, Clint worked with a team to track and model the rise of Russian influence operations via social media leading up to the US presidential election of 2016. This research led Clint to testify before 4 different Senate committees in 2017 and 2018 regarding Russia's information warfare campaign against the US and the West. It is my great and distinct honor to introduce Clint Watts. Clint, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thanks, Leslie, and thanks for having me back. It's been, I'm trying to remember, it's been almost a year and a half. I think the presentation I did with NAS was like right before I went into my house and never left again. And so I actually left last week, I think, for the first time. So good to see everybody, and thanks for having me on today. And so the topic today is kind of media literacy, but I wanted to talk about the reasons why we're not literate in media first. And it's actually an article I've been working on this week because it's kind of a good reminder to figure out how we ended up in this space. If you remember 1985, it would be, we actually were working on this here in my office with my team. That's 1985, my very bad version of it up on the board, if you can see it. But if you can remember 1985, news and information was confined and there was a finite amount of it. What was it confined to? It was your local newspaper. It was local radio stations for the most part. It was local television broadcasts that were usually on at 5 and 6 p.m. or depending on what time zone you're in. And then there would be a nightly broadcast at 10. And then there would be a national television news broadcast, usually one time a day, that was at 5:30. It was in that 30 minutes between the two local news broadcasts. And then there might be like Nightline with, or Ted Koppel might come on very late at night. And so the amount of news or information that you would take in, the amount of media you would take in on any given day was pretty much confined to no more than a couple hours. And you would have to watch every single minute to consume all of those 2 hours. If you fast forward all the way to 2016 to 2020 and today, especially with the pandemic, the number of hours by which an American human consumes media now is astronomical in comparison to that. And so when we're talking about literacy and being effective, there's a couple different dynamics that happen there. One, just the amount of content that you encounter on Twitter in an hour. If you just stared at your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed, in an hour is astronomical. And so we're asking humans to parse out and assess thousands of bits of news information every day successfully 100% of the time. That's not going to happen, right? Because there's no filter, there's no 1985 filter between the information and what's going on with us. There's also twice as many people, right? There's just millions upon billions of people, more people, all with the ability to create media today. So the numbers at YouTube are always staggering, but it's like 500 hours a second of YouTube content or some astronomical number. I don't have it exactly right, I'm sure, but it's an astronomical amount of video content that is uploaded at any given moment in the world today. And that's incredible. And now everyone has the capability of being their own print, radio, and television broadcast service at any given moment of the day if they have a smartphone. And in the mid 2000s to late 2000s, I and many others were tracking Al Qaeda in Iraq, and it was remarkable because they were making YouTube videos, which they were sharing. Now everyone is their own full multimedia, multi-spectrum news service if they choose to be or if they want to be, and they all have different motives, and they can use each other's content. In the old days, ABC, CBS, NBC would ask each other to use each other's content, or PBS might pull from it, or they would have pool reporters or pool photographers. They would all use the same images. Today, everyone has all images all the time. Not only that, they can pull from those images and they can manipulate them in any way that they like using a $30 a month subscription to Adobe. So this creates the confounding problems of both technology, speed, and volume of information over time. The biggest change, though, is the vector. In 1985, it was basically those local news outlets and just 3 or 4 national broadcasts delivered through a filter via people that looked remarkably the same. It was usually 3 middle-aged white men with dark hair would be on the 3 channels, and they would deliver the news at the exact same time every single day. And so the messenger didn't matter very much because they all looked the same, and they mostly were interviewing people that were dressed in suits that looked exactly like them. If you ever go watch 1985 news like video now, it's the same thing every day, right? And so the information mattered more, the message mattered more, but the messenger was somewhat irrelevant because they all roughly looked the same and they said the same sort of things. They were all briefed to say things in the same way. That is absolutely not the case today. Today, the goal is to deliver a message on social media that has confirms or conforms to the biases of the audience they're trying to deliver to. The entire intention of it is to gain more traction, and you can watch that metrically. And then the second part of that conundrum comes in, which is the algorithm. The algorithm delivers more of the information that people like to them, hence the like button, which you click on your social media feed, delivers you more of what you want. So that's why I also think it's nonsensical when I hear the sort of like, let's break up big tech, because nobody wants a poorly performing Google search engine that doesn't find what you want, and they don't want a Facebook feed that delivers you things you don't want to see. No one's signed up for that yet. It would be the worst free service, and no one would sign up for it as a pay service. So these conundrums lead to the second part, which is implicit bias. Implicit bias is people want information from people that look like them and talk like them. And if you went into your social media feed, you would find that your feed is dominated, for the most part, there's very few people who can avoid this, by people that look like you and talk like you, because those are the people you talk to the most. They're friends and family. They're people in your community, but it's not necessarily a media filter that might have been there in 1985 who's evaluating information for veracity and reliability. They understand the sources of it. They can assess accuracy. Instead, the source of the information isn't who made the information, it's who delivered the information. And so that's where you have someone delivering you information that you like and trust. And because you trust them, you trust what they deliver you. And so that's that information sneak attack, a falsivity that can come right into your social media feed. The third part is availability bias. If in 1985 you wanted to research, I'm sure many of you used to go to the library. You might be able to get a microfiche. You could get the actual newspapers and you would look at it. Information just wasn't that available. Today, you can Google nearly anything with your opinion in it, and you will find something that supports that. Almost any headline. If not, a false information peddler will go to what we refer to as a news desert. They will pick a topic and they will create news about it, whether it's true or false, so that they occupy and hold that information space. You are more likely to find, in terms of availability bias today on the internet, what you want to see more than what you need to see. It's just that much easier. And particularly when it comes into the medical space today, or election integrity. Two big issues we faced over the last 1 year. If you are out there and searching for it, you're much more likely probably to find false information, because there are more people making false information. There's more availability of false information, and the truth always has to trail the falsehoods oftentimes. It's slower for public officials, for election experts or election integrity professionals. It's tougher if you're a part of medical and science to make sure that you have all the facts right about something that's very complicated and get it out. Whereas the liar's dividend always plays to speed. And that leads to the fourth part, which is there is a series of manipulators that are out there in the world today, and they understand what you tend to believe. And so I always reinforce this in my talks, that people, just in terms of rumor psychology, and even what they teach you in terms of information operations, psychological operations, people tend to believe four things. And if you can just use that as a rubric, if you're a manipulator, you can be highly successful. That is, people tend to believe what they see first. Even if you know it's false on the surface, you have to consider that it might be true to refute it. So that plants a seed in one's brain. The second is people tend to believe what they see most. In terms of what they see most, that oftentimes is that availability bias. They can find what they want to see, or coming from people they want to talk to, much more quickly in the social media space than they can in terms of the news space. Separately, the third thing is if it comes from a trusted source. If information comes from a trusted source, or you think the source is trustful, you'll tend to take it on, whether it is accurate or not. So it's always to the advantage of a manipulator to say, trust me, don't trust them, trust me, don't trust them, because that leads to the fourth part, which is that which is not accompanied by a rebuttal. And in social media, rebuttals come few and far between. People either censor themselves because they want to be part of the crowd, or in terms of a rebuttal, they block people or don't follow them because they're not saying what they want. So the three biases sort of blend together. And if you're a sophisticated manipulator in the social media space, you know how to bring that influence weapon to your advantage to try and drive people to your behavior change or your objective. And so coming back to what do we do about it, you're starting to see, and I'll actually talk on the technology side, you're starting to see on the social media platform side, two sort of things happen. One is this debate about what is censorship, what does Section 230 allow, what sort of information can go into the open information space, and then what are technology companies responsible for? And I think that'll be the big regulatory battle that we'll see coming forward in the next year is what is free speech and what is censorship, and what are we allowed to say in terms of lies, disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda. Separately from that, you're also seeing tricks and tools being put into the algorithm to try and slow people down. And so Twitter does a version of this now, which is interesting if you've experienced it, where they say, do you want to read the article before you share it? Because oftentimes people are sharing titles. They haven't actually read the article. Those sorts of technological tools, I think, are pretty fantastic. They're also starting to get to a point where they can understand metering, or the idea that a piece of information hits and it takes off so rapidly that it sends off a trigger in their own system, so where they can start to evaluate it. The third part is the deep fake, altered images, altered video sort of concept. And a lot of the technological tools that are coming online are trying to deal with that. Because no matter what happens at the end of the day today, people read less and they watch more. And that's what social media has done. If you are a manipulator trying to send messages and do text, you're going to be much slower and less effective than people who are doing it through video, video news, audio news, blogs. Who writes a blog anymore when you do a podcast? It's sort of the medium is changing. And with it, that literacy also needs to take a big step forward, because right now, in terms of extremism, disinformation, almost everything that I'm most worried about is in the audio and video form. It's not newspapers. That's not really how people are getting their information oftentimes in today's world, because everybody can film themselves or record themselves today. So that the technology function is going to be there. The separate part is something I worked on, and I had actually worked with Chris Krebs, the director of CISA, last year, and we had tried, okay, what are different tools we can use, right, in the information space. And Michelle's going to be much better in this area than I am, but what are ways that we can educate the public and set them up for success? So one of them, I worked with a group of young people who were building Chrome extensions, and what the Chrome extensions that they were building was essentially a way to help sources that we known or not to be very reputable to tip them. And it was interesting because the younger people were like, I want to tell my grandparents on Facebook this is false because they send stuff to me. And so they were like, I need to educate them. But they came up with a pretty innovative technique. There's also things like NewsGuard, which is out there, which I always wanted to do nutrition labels for information. NewsGuard basically did it, and I think it's a pretty cool thing. And I use it on my own Chrome browser, and it tells me, hey, this is the rating trustworthiness of the outlet. And as a former Army officer, I appreciate that because you're never going to be able to fact check every piece of information because I can make fake news faster than you can check fake news. But if you go, as we would say, to run around and try and catch all the artillery shells, you will always lose. But if you go to the sound of the guns, that's where you'll find the sources of information and focus on the sources. So I think that's a much more effective technique. We had also tried to reach to teaching rubrics and techniques to younger people. And one of the ones we did for the election and for COVID-19 with Chris's team at CISA was graphic novels. So we actually put out 2 graphic novels. The idea was high school kids, if they read it, their parents will too because they like the pictures. They won't admit to it, but they will actually sort of check it out. It's like an alternative way. We built it for digital and for print. And hopefully over time, we can start to think of those innovative things. And then the last part that I want to kind of note, and I don't want to take too long, but to think about is what we actually learned in the intelligence analysis business in the government, which was several techniques about how to evaluate information sources and how to evaluate expertise, because this is always critical for reliability and veracity of media literacy, which is what's the motivation of the person that is producing the information? Is it monetary? Do you know that? Do they have ads on their website? Do they say, would you submit donations? At least you know why they're doing it. Are they in a position of compromise where they need to do it on behalf, perhaps on behalf of someone else because they're in trouble? That is less likely, but always out there. Is it ideological? It's just something that they believe in. And then the last part is really, what is expertise and how do we evaluate it? And so we always talk about 3 things that we use in terms of our intelligence evaluations. 1, what's the expertise in terms of certifications, credentials? Do they have those things? The second one is experience in terms of years. How much have they actually practiced this discipline? And then the third part we always talk about is both firsthand experience and analysis. Do they apply some sort of analysis using their experience and their credentials to actually come up with unique insights about things? Or are they boilerplate repeating things, or maybe talking out of their expertise? So the other classic one, if you've ever read Philip Tetlock's work, is looking for foxes. When we tend to find an expert who predicts something amazing, we tend to take that expert and ask them to predict everything. And there's no reason to believe they would have expertise in everything. This sometimes will happen to me. I go into the media space and they'll be like, well, what do you think is going to happen somewhere else? And I'll be like, well, my opinion is the following. But you probably shouldn't ask me because I don't know that topic or speak the language or have a special skill to analyze that. In my, some topics I'm an inch deep and some I'm 10 feet deep. It just depends on what that topic might be. And so how can we help people shape and understand experts and realize that no one's Nostradamus. We can't go to them for everything and have them predict and analyze every topic evenly and understand it to the same degree. The biggest thing, and the one I fear the most right now, is for young people. So I've done some of these seminars and they're very worried about their older parents falling for fake news, but they buy something off Instagram from an influencer that they don't realize is probably paid for as an advertiser from a company. And so the media matters, and everyone is manipulated in one form or another, can be influenced around the news in one way or another. It can be emotionally attached to things that don't quite make sense to them. So how can we help people of different generations and different mediums understand the basics around why am I receiving this information? What's the real source of the information? What are techniques I have in my hip pocket that I can use? How can we administer an algorithm that's much more fair and helps us understand the information? And then what are the facts, both the fact checking online and the tech checking online, that help us get to understand what we are consuming at about 8 to 9 Facebook posts a minute. If you've ever watched anybody in a coffee shop, they're moving through that stuff very, very quickly. And so, yeah, I think that's it. Am I on time there, Leslie? I was kind of watching the clock, but I can I can take questions, or I forgot if we're going to switch off and do questions, Leslie.
Why don't we go ahead and have Michelle go now, because I think
Great.
a lot of what she's going to talk about will complement what you said, and then we can go back to questions if that's okay with both of your schedules.
It's fine with me, although I would love to just listen to Clint for the next 30 minutes.
Right?
Awesome.
Oh my God, it's so fascinating. I love that. I love the perspective you bring to all of this. And I'm going to bring hopefully a complementary perspective to it, but certainly I am kind of knee deep in the education side of things. And so I will what I'm trying to do in my presentation is to really frame where we're at with media literacy education. And because I think that once you know that, we'll be able to have the deeper conversation about, well, what do we do now? Like, what do we do about these problems? So if you go to the next slide, so I am the executive director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. And just so you know, so that everyone knows what we're talking about, this is how we define media literacy. And it's the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. So as Clint referred to, it's about building on the foundation of traditional literacy. What does it mean to be literate citizens today? What do we need to understand about content that we consume and create? So the purpose of media literacy education is to help individuals of all ages to develop the habits of inquiry and skills of expression that they need to be critical thinkers, effective communicators, and active citizens in today's world. So to become a successful student, to be a responsible citizen, to be a competent consumer, we need to develop expertise with the multisensory media world that surrounds us, right? So media literacy represents really a necessary response to that complex, ever-changing information landscape. So we are a nonprofit membership organization, and we've actually been in existence since 1997. And we are the largest membership organization for media literacy education around the world. And we spend every working day working towards a vision to see media literacy highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill. And we have over 7,000 members. We are a diverse group of individuals who are educators, researchers, librarians, administrators, students, technologists. You can go to the next slide. Institutions, corporations, organizations. So, and like I said, a third of our members are from the global community, because what we've recognized over time is that we have to deal with these global issues in a global way. So I want to explain to you that we have over 80 organizations within our umbrella. So these organizations are just touch on the vast amount of media literacy education work being done around the country. And we're talking about news literacy organizations, public media, film education, civic education, journalism education. There are teacher training organizations. NewsGuard, that was mentioned before, is part of our community. So as the umbrella organization, our work is in lifting this work and amplifying it, right? Is making sure that our partners and members in this work really go to scale and making sure everyone is getting media literacy education. So you can go to the next slide, actually. I'm sorry, I think my numbers are off. That's probably why it's tricky. Another thing that I wanted to mention, and this is again to show the vastness of media literacy education, is we have an alliance with 11 other national teacher organizations. And we're talking about the librarians, the technology teachers, the journalism teachers, the social studies, the math, the science, It's PBS education. We are all working together because what we recognize is that if we're really going to take media literacy seriously, we need to make sure that we understand it is not a course that we need to teach on the side. It is a skill set that we need to be teaching students from the earliest ages and through every discipline. It just like we teach our kids to be literate, not only in English class, everywhere in the school system, we need to do that with media literacy. So just to give you a sense of kind of what the reach is, we do Media Literacy Week. It's now a global initiative. Last year, we had 44 states and 37 countries involved with just the US one. We do research projects. We hold conferences. We're doing another conference in July about media literacy and social justice. But I want to make a point about where we are now. And so namely, like I said, has been in existence since 1997. But it wasn't until 2016 where we were really, I mean, media literacy was really launched into cultural conversation. And that was thanks to the amplification of the term fake news. And, you know, we have seen media literacy go from a concept discussed at academic conferences to really a movement. And I no longer have to, you know, spend time explaining what media literacy is or why you should care about it. It's really actually grown pretty impossible to even meet the demand of for our community's expertise. And as we know, false information, you know, has 70% greater chance of being disseminated than the truth. And that's because fake news and false information is built to create emotional responses, and our human brain is triggered by those emotional responses. And this has certainly proved to be a huge problem with real life consequences. But I did want to note from a media literacy frame why, in our perspective, that's not the only problem with fake news. So when we talk about fake news and we talk about disinformation, we tend to want to put information into two buckets, right? We want to put it into like true or false, real versus fake, fact versus fiction. But the problem is information is super complicated. It doesn't fall into two buckets. It falls into endless buckets. And information can be news, it can be opinion, it can be advertising, entertainment, humor. Even if we just look at misinformation, there's tons in there, right? There's propaganda, there's hoaxes, there's conspiracy theories, there's disinformation, there's inaccuracies. So we kind of limit our understanding of information if we simply try to label it with a binary label, right? We're missing out on that deeper understanding. And the goal of media literacy is to understand information, right? Its purpose, its value, the audience, the bias, the agenda. So we strive to think deeper, to understand how media and information influence us, our beliefs, our values, our relationships, the choices we make in our life, because media messages are impacting all of us. And so you can think of media literacy as a GPS to guide you through the complicated media landscape around you. And, you know, I hear a lot this question of like, asking like, you know, how do I know this is true? Or how can I tell this is fact? And while those are really important questions, what I want to tell you is that, you know, this is our list of key questions you should ask when you're analyzing media messages. And there's 26 of them, right? But just for an example, who made it? Why was it made? Who was it made for? Who might benefit from it? Who might be harmed by it? What does it want me to think? What's left out that might be important to know? What techniques are they using to get my reaction? How might different people interpret it differently? And then, is it fact, is it opinion, or something else? Because what we have to recognize is most information out there is probably in the something else category. And so that's just to frame that deeper thinking that we want not only students, but people that are interacting with media at whatever age. We want those muscles to be working so we know and we train ourselves what questions to ask. So what does a media literate person look like? So they're curious and inquisitive and skeptical. They're asking questions all the time about everything. constantly having their eyes and ears open to new ideas, to questioning, to all of it, knows that, you know, media literate people know that media messages have a point of view, and understand that those media messages influence us and influence our beliefs and behaviors. So when you look at the state of media literacy education in the US, um, it's complicated. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that we have yet to make a commitment as a nation, as a country, to supporting media literacy. We see great practice, but there is no kind of commitment that this is a national priority, although I see hope in the future. So let me just explain real quickly what the community looks like. And some of this will kind of go back to how I explained our community and what our community is made up of. So it's the way that we look at it is it's kind of being practiced in these three areas: pre-K to 12, higher education, and communities. Within the pre-K-12 space, there are subject area teachers, there are library media specialists, tech integration specialists, outside organizations coming into school. Higher ed, there are different departments that are addressing media literacy. Sometimes it's a standalone course, sometimes it's integrated into existing courses. I teach a media literacy course at Brooklyn College for undergraduate journalism majors, that it's in the TV radio program. There are different strands of studies, a growing number of degree programs, a growing number of research and scholarship. And then what might be more significant and more pertinent to all of you is the community space, the work that's being done in community-based organizations, nonprofits, public libraries, community centers, public media. PBS is doing extraordinary work when it comes to media literacy. And we have like a partnership with them, like really trying to educate those that are not in formal education. And when you look at, there's been a real push to educating adults, especially seniors, in media literacy skills because of what we saw around the 2016 election. So looking at this, again, going back to our community, this is just a reminder of the depth of the work and how it's, you know, we really, really see incredible practice around the US, but we've yet to make that kind of, yet to really hit that urgency to make it a national priority. Although I do feel like we're getting there. So some things that we've seen that make us feel really positive for media literacy. One is just the urgency is really evident. And like I said, like I'm not joking, like in 2016, people weren't calling me back. They were like, what do you do? And now it's, you know, people are really, really interested in this. I mean, just look at, I'm talking to you today. Like, how exciting is that? That even you understand how important this work is. The growing attention, we have increased support, increased practice, increased research, really, really amazing, amazing progress being made. And certainly and like the Alliance itself, again, just recalling that as just a huge step in the formal education space to have all of these teacher organizations committing to media literacy as a priority is enormous for our country, for our teachers, for our students. But also just the opportunity that we have been seeing with those in national security, those in the election space, the partnerships that are possible, is really heartening, and I think that there's a lot that we can do together with both of our, you know, knowledge bases to really make a difference, in terms of kind of the older generation, those that are in out of formal education. So just quickly, I'm almost done here, and just to recognize kind of like where we've hit walls over the years is that idea that there is no standard model, meaning that like and this has happened where a school or a school district have said like, I want to bring media literacy to this school, how do I do it? It really is dependent on so many different factors, dependent on resources and skill and community and all of this stuff. So that makes it really hard to scale. It makes the work really interesting, but it makes it hard to scale. And it still relies on individuals. It still relies on, an organization like this saying, hey, we need to learn more about this, or a teacher in Missouri, or an undergraduate professor in Maine saying, oh, I think I should be looking at this with my students. That again, it creates really great practice for individual students, but it doesn't make systemic change. And obviously, it is clear at this point that we need to be thinking about real change. There's always competition for funding in education, and only so much, money to go around. And so that has always been really challenging. And then just the kind of lack of public understanding and the way that mis and disinformation have really taken over the conversations have really both been kind of an opportunity and a challenge, because it has brought, just like shed a light on this work, which has been so amazing for our community. But it's also difficult because what we do have to recognize is that there's tons of information out there that doesn't fall into mis and disinformation. Even if we were miraculously able to get rid of all mis and disinformation, there's still a whole lot of information that we need to understand. And recognizing that all information needs to have a greater understanding is really, really important. So just to frame the policy landscape, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there is work being done. And we have partners at an organization called Media Literacy Now. And they are doing really the policy kind of legislative push in the media literacy community. And they did a report actually in 2020 that just gives kind of an overview of where the country is at with education policy around media literacy or in support of media literacy. And you'll see like there's decent amount of work being done. But if you just look at all the gray spaces, the fact that all of those states in our country are not actively pursuing media literacy education in any statewide way is disconcerting, given the fact that all of the things Clint said, like we are in an environment right now where there's no time to lose in terms of the information and the speed of information. And so there's a lot of work to be done. But I highly recommend, if you're interested in kind of looking at your state and looking at where you fall in terms of media literacy leadership, Media Literacy Now is a great kind of space to just get on their newsletter and find out what's going on in your state. And so I guess to wrap it up, because I think I have some of the questions that have been posed, but I'll let Leslie, you kind of navigate and facilitate that. But I think what we've established over time is that our democracy is in danger if we don't have a media literate population, and it is so vital and so important, and why I wake up every morning and do this work, and why I'm grateful for people like Clint for doing his work. And I really hope that there are ways that we can work together to, protect our democracy and to really work toward a media literate future.
Thank you both. You were awesome. And I didn't even get to introduce you, Michelle.
Oh, that's so funny. I just jumped in. I don't know. This is when you get me at 2:30, I'm like already in a groove. So
well, you did great. So no introduction necessary. Okay, I have a couple of questions in the chat. Let me first sort of preface some of this. Part of the reason that we wanted to hold a media literacy forum was because we worked really hard at the end of 2019 and through 2020, and it will continue, on a campaign called Trusted Info 2020, directing people to their state and local election officials as their trusted sources for election information. And, one of my colleagues says it takes a very special person to follow an election official on social media. So we wanted to figure out ways that we might be able to help the secretaries to sort of expand their reach, but also trying to understand from my perspective, who are those? I struggle with trusted sources, right? I know election officials are trusted sources for election information, state and local. But I struggle with other trusted sources. And I think that if we can find ways to elevate the fact that the secretaries and their colleagues are trusted sources, I think we'll be in a better place. Let me go to some of the questions here. It says, with elections, social media has picked up misinformation. How does the election department counteract? I guess so basically, and this is something that you talked about, Clint, a little bit too, where it's difficult to get information out there quickly when you're responding to something, much harder than when you're creating the mis and disinformation in the first place. Is there any recommendations that you have for something like that, either one of you?
I do have a couple, but I can let Michelle go too, but
No, you go first, Clinton. I'll add
Okay.
to what, yeah, of course.
So I think the first one is anticipate. You know what the narratives are going to be, the dates and people change, but it's kind of like Mad Libs. I tell people like disinformation and misinformation tend to be like Mad Libs. Someone's going to say something about the voting machines. Someone's going to say something about ballots being, stuffed. You kind of know what the stories are going to be. So that gives you a way to anticipate. I think the second part, which goes with anticipating, is how do you ensure trust in video format? I really think it's got to be visual, because routinely what I'll see in social media, even when they say a news story comes out or an election official walks out to a podium and says, this did not happen, there's no evidence of it, they'll say, show me, right? As if they know how an election machine works or whatever. Doesn't make any sense. I don't know how it works, but I trust in the official. So is there a way in 90 seconds in a short video that you can preload election machine? This is how it works, and then whatever the conspiracy is that comes in, you can be like, nope, watch this video first, and then stop. Look right here. This isn't what happened. We can prove it, right? You almost have to already have 80% of the content ready, produce 20% of the content more, and then fire very, very quickly. And so when I was talking about first, most trusted source, no rebuttal, that means you got to be quick, say it over and over in many different mediums from a trusted source that looks like it talks like the person advancing the conspiracy. And you have to be inside their social media group. So you can do like preparatory, the conspiracy, where it's probably going to come from. They tend to come from the same groups over and over again. Vaccines is one right now. It's like a classic example. Can you be inside that loop much, much quicker? That's actually that insane drawing there in the middle. We'll have a very fancy graphic version coming out, I think, by Friday. We're editing the article, but you have to intercept it in advance, and you know that it's coming. You know what it will be. Not always. There's always ones you don't know, goofy things. The one that was taken off today was about magnets attaching to GPS trackers in your vaccines or some crazy thing like that we came across. There'll be an oddball like that, but generally the history has shown that the disinformation narratives tend to stay the same. So you can think about ways of getting in there, very, very early. And one of the things I wanted to do, and I talked to Chris Krebs and his team with about summer of 2019. I was like, can we have a voting machine show in those places where we know people don't trust voting machines? We take the machines there, and we do it. We bring the actual people there. We shut it down in advance, and we film that, right? Like, are the ways to get out in front of it, pretty early. Sorry, don't want to go any longer, but
no, that's great.
Michelle?
I agree wholeheartedly with all of Clint's points. And I was going to say the anticipate thing, I think is really important. I talk a lot to, parents about kind of kids and technology use. And I always say, your kids are going to see stuff you don't want to see, right, on the internet. So instead of waiting for that to happen, have the conversation about what what you want them to do when they do see stuff you don't want to see. Like, so you know the misinformation is coming. You know that the campaign to, for against like the election process is coming. So what can we do to really preempt that and to kind of, and I think dealing with things in a general way rather than trying to literally attack every single piece of misinformation could be helpful too. It's just to have I mean, it really truly is a clear marketing, right? Like we have to market the work that we do. And so I think just being really clear about the major points of like, you're going to hear things about voting, booths. And so voting machines. So here is the content to preempt that. I do have to argue just one thing, Clint, is like 90 seconds is actually really long these days. So you might need to literally, I'm not even joking. TikTok recently said that it's 18 seconds to get people's attention. So it's how can we get people's attentions immediately to make sure they know we exist and the experts are there. And then engaging people where they are, is really important too, is that making sure you're getting to all your spaces and making sure you're getting to your young voters and all of that. And they're in different places than the older voters. So making sure that you get the message out is really important.
Okay, second question. If people are being directed to messages that reinforce their existing beliefs, how can a nonprofit or a public television outlet reach people who do not currently follow their content? Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, my dog's going to start barking right now. So I think that, if you are a public station and you want to get to, more people, I mean, I think that there's, I'm not a marketer, but I know there are ways that you can do that. But I think, making sure that your message is appealing and, I hate to use the word, but entertaining and something that people will want to share, making sure the content is something that people want to share. It will eventually spread outside of the following, right? Is just like, you've got to really go for those shares. You've got to go to make sure that people are spreading the word. But I also think that like, what is the ultimate goal? Like there's never going to be a time where everyone in our country is watching PBS, or there's never going to be a time where we're going to get everyone behind, all of it. So we have to make sure that we're going to the majority and making sure that we're, again, spreading the message as much as we can so that it gets spread, it gets shared and shared and shared.
Clint, anything to add? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, one thing I would also say is that we tend to forget about the physical world. So if you're being overwhelmed online, it's better to insert yourself on the ground. So that's something to think about. What the tendency tends to be when I encounter people, they're like, how do we get into their social media feed? And I was like, well, you could show up at their neighborhood, because then you're in their feed. So, people don't realize oftentimes the algorithms are based around location, right? So there are ways that when you start producing content, you enter the feed whether you do that or not. So, for example, let's say it's around election integrity issue in Ohio or whatever the state might be. Oftentimes, what I've seen people do is like, we'll film a rebuttal from Brooklyn. No, that's not going to work, right? So people will be like, you don't know, you're not here. So you move into the physical space and occupy that physical space. And both when you're producing it live or even recorded or tagging where it's at, you now are increasing the odds that you're going to be picked up in that geographic area where it's occurring. A lot of these things are highly local when it occurs. And the second part is you're showing up in person, and the best way to refute something isn't to do it from a distance by telling someone, no, that's not true and I'm not there. It's better to be there and sort of encounter it in person. And that's why you see a lot of the more effective stuff today is man on the street, the old man on the street sort of thing. Like, you jump out there, you interview somebody, we used to have local reporters that did a lot of that work for us, and we don't have it as much anymore. But there are ways you can do that if you can anticipate it, where it's not the easiest thing to pull off, but it will be more effective than trying to shout from afar, on social media and get yourself into that filter bubble that person's in.
So actually, I have a question on local media. Local media, since they are turning stories so fast these days, seem to trust Twitter, etc. How do you still push them to call the official?
Oof, gosh, I wish I knew that.
Call the actual expert.
I don't know the context of that example, but I
Yes.
have to say the producers I work with hesitate pretty strongly. I get alerted a lot of times when there's events, usually they're national security, but they don't pull the trigger until they feel somewhat comfortable. It's a race to be first, but it's also a race to be right. So I think it depends to a degree. If you see, this is where the gang up of what you might call fringe media, that run it out of control. Breaking 911 being an example of that their whole thing is to just get people worked up, about breaking news events. And so that can trigger sometimes the media. They're still not great, but I don't know that they're as bad as they used to be on that, to be honest. I feel like they give me more warnings now and then drop me because they're not sure or tell me to hold off way more than they used to. I feel like the folks I work with try pretty hard to be diligent about it.
I wonder also, we do this sometimes in the media literacy space, but it's always about how much capacity any one organization has. Is, when you see stories that you feel frustrated that you weren't asked, right? That the expert wasn't called, or that, that your office responds to it and says, thank you for, doing this article, or, giving this important topic attention. In the future, please feel free, please reach out to us. We have stuff that we can share that might be helpful. We actually do that a lot in media literacy because there's a lot of things that happen that don't have any education context. And so we're like, don't forget the educators, So being a little, responsive and saying like, wow, it's great, this article, that you put this out there to our community, but in the future, please utilize our office as a source, or however you want to word it. Remind people over and over again that you're here.
I have a question from a secretary. It's a long one, so it's a good thing you're sitting down. As we in the critical infrastructure community know, much of this mis and disinformation is coming from foreign adversaries. As a Republican elected official in a blue state who is working on this within my state and within my political party, I wonder what work is being done with media leaders on both sides of the aisle on this work. As I looked at the slides of the partners who are working on media literacy and the states doing the work, there's a correlation to what some would see between those groups and left-leaning organizations. I personally believe the left is much more out in front on integrating information and media than the right. I am not saying this to be critical. I'm just wondering if there's outreach to credible right-leaning media organizations to work on this as Americans rather than political outlets. It's so important, and I think our message is being shared only on one side. My question, I guess, is how can we bring them in to help build a wider audience? Sorry for the long question.
Go ahead,
Any
Clinton.
ideas?
Yeah,
Like-
I think they got to be open to working with groups. I'll just be honest, they've not been very open to having me talk to them. I mean, I'm not against it. It's been interesting having grown up in Missouri and what used to be a fairly even political space. It's probably it's a lot more right leaning now than it used to be. Yeah, I did a session in Houston, Texas, actually, that was pretty great, but it was closed door, kind of in and out of the view of the public in the sense. So then it was no problem. Like, it wasn't a big deal. yeah, even with the elected officials, it's been weird because I know some of them or have briefed some of them, and as long as it's closed door, everything goes fine. It's the open space. It just, they're not really wanting to do it. Um, and I always feel bad because, well, hopefully, whatever, I'll just tell you. Senator Langford, asked me a question when I testified, and it was a really good question, and I answered it honestly. And I think he got beat up for it probably, even though it was a good question. He should have asked a question. Like, he was very concerned about it. And I've seen him and some of the others on that Senate Intel Committee work really well together. Um, but it's very hard unless you're on one or two sort of select committees or one or two states. It's very hard to kind of do it nowadays. I wish I had a better answer for it. I mean, I'm totally open to it, but the last time I testified, I was literally told by one of the senators, "Don't say that. You can't say that." And I'm like, "I'm totally gonna say it." Like, so then the next time I think I got zeroed out. Like, they just kick you off, the panels or whatever, which is fine. I mean, I don't get paid to do that anyway, so it just means I get more free time. But it's sad, like, that was the whole purpose of like testifying and going to do those things. And it's gamed so much now that, yeah, they're not entirely open to it. That's not. I don't think that's the case across the board, with everybody. Um, and I
I
have
have to agree. Yeah, I have to agree with you, Clinton, that it's hard. Like, we've tried. They're not like, there's not a lot of like, we fought in terms of a media literacy space to kind of fight the narrative that media literacy kind of falls within this liberal ideal. And it's so shocking to me because it's so clear to me that media impact us all, no matter what our political beliefs, no matter what our religious, no matter what. Like, media is the thing that is impacting us all. So the idea that media literacy is falls on one side of the spectrum is shocking to me. But I think also, if you look at the academic space and you look at these spaces that tend to be quote unquote more liberal, then your community grows into, this framing of like, oh, it's a liberal, these are liberal ideals. And I think that you've just hit on something that we're really trying to push back on, and really, really trying to say that this is, this matters to everyone to understand the media environment. Like, no one wins if we don't, So I think I wish I had an answer to that, but all I can say is that you've hit on a very clear issue that we've been reckoning with for a while.
can I add though, the Koch Foundation, I think it is, right? I've actually bumped into them a few times and they've been pretty great. Like, some of the folks, and they've got fellows out in Silicon Valley now,
Yeah.
that they put out there. And they've been fine, and especially we were at one of the social media companies. I can't remember. They had like an event, but it was all the companies were there, and they were pretty welcoming. It was good to have them in there because, I mean, I grew up in Missouri. I definitely didn't grow up in a liberal place. I can tell you that much. So, I mean, I thought it was okay. It's more like how it plays out, I think, in the open media space, and I'm sure you see it as well. That it gets a little weird.
Well, I thank you both. And I think that's my source of frustration. Last year, my husband and I might have written a book on this very topic. And that's the thing that just amazes me, is that both sides have made it partisan, and I'd like to be bipartisan when I talk about it. And I think the left has done, yeoman's work of really doing the education. And I just think the common ground that we can get in the election community in particular is that critical infrastructure and the actual real threat that has nothing to do with politics. It's about undermining, and we all know it. I don't need to tell all of you what this is about, but I think we've got to find a way, because I think that's why it gets discounted right now. And I was just hoping that you're going to say that, we've talked to the National Review and they're on board, and I'm glad to hear, words like the Koch brothers. I think that's what it's going to take, is reaching out on that kind of, like I said, something unifying about either a foreign attack or being Americans. I don't know what that language is, but I just think we need to do more of that, because we're never going to get the fringe, but we can get some of those, reasonable folks. And it's got to be on more than just the left, or it just gets discounted. Oh yeah, well, that's, that's just their news outlet. So I appreciate the work that you're both doing, and I apologize for taking so long, but I just think that we've got to figure out a way to depolarize it and politicize it and talk about the real threat, because as we all know, it is a real threat. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those points. Well said.
Kim, I think there's 4 issues too that we can do that on. Election interference is one, or election integrity. The other is natural disasters. Third is public health, like around COVID and vaccines and things like that. And the fourth one, ultimately, I think will be China. Those are 4 broad areas where I don't get the same jolt of anger once I start talking. Yeah.
All right, everybody. It is 3:30. Our speakers killed it today. I'm delighted, and I'm delighted by the content, the conversation, the questions. I'm sure we could go longer, but our WebEx will kick off, so we don't want to do that. But I want to thank both Clint and Michelle. It was a great conversation and great presentations, and we are very grateful.
Thank
to
you.
both.
Nice to see everyone. Nice to meet you, Clint. And please,
Yeah,
I'd love to talk more about how we can actually do some stuff together. So let's talk more.
That sounds
Awesome.
great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.